Hey everyone, what are private school vouchers and why are they once again being pushed by state leadership? And what role will charter schools play in all of this? Reporter for the ProPublica Texas Tribune investigative initiative, Kiah Collier, published a new investigation on Texas charter schools, and she joins me to explain her findings. It's Monday, October 16th, 2023. I'm Raheel Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Kiah, welcome into CityCast Houston. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I know there's a lot going on with education right now, and we're going to jump right into it. So Governor Abbott is once again focused on getting a school voucher program approved with Senate Bill 1 after failing to get it passed previously. What's the difference this time?
So bills like this are, long, detailed, and complicated, but fundamentally, there's not much difference from the main voucher bill from earlier this year that was passed in the Senate and died in the House. So it would still use taxpayer dollars to create education savings accounts. It would still give families access to $8,000 a year to pay for private school tuition and other educational expenses. And it still would cost, I believe, roughly $500 million over the next 2 years. So the differences in the bills overall are very minimal, if any. I haven't read the details, but yeah.
You know, it's crazy. It would give families $8,000 for private schools. And yesterday I was at a after school activity with my daughter, and I was talking to another parent who has a child in private school. And she said it costs $40,000 a year for private school. And I'm like, what? Hold on. The one that she goes to. So like $8,000, I'm sure that helps. But is that really going to be the difference for somebody to say, you know what, I'm going private school now because of this $8,000? That's like a drop in the bucket, it seems like. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think that's one of the many arguments that have been made against the voucher program. That it will only help, wealthy parents who can already afford private school tuition and that kind of thing. But I don't know, maybe there are cheap schools out there that this would, go a long way.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to find out. And also right now in a time, Kiah, where both parties are so divided in politics, it seems like this private school voucher program is the great uniter because both Democrats and rural Republicans don't want this program.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is viewing this as a uniting issue right now, though I guess it depends on how you look at it. So for vouchers to pass, Governor Greg Abbott, who's pushing for this, and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who's pushing for this, they're going to have to get rural Republicans in the House to come around in some way. Democrats have made it clear that they're not going to support vouchers under any circumstance. And that's going to be a really tricky task with GOP leadership so at odds with each other right now in the wake of, the Ken Paxton impeachment trial and some other things that have happened in recent days. Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who leads the Senate, and House Speaker Dade Phelan, they're at each other's throats right now. And that just does not bode well for bringing the GOP together to create a program that has failed to pass for years, and I think decades even.
Okay, so Kiah, also tell me about Senate Bill 2. What is this about?
So this is a teacher pay raise / school safety funding bill that was filed in the Senate. I think it was heard already. I'm not sure, in committee. And it's the interesting thing about it is that it's not technically on the special session agenda, which is set by Governor Abbott. As of right now, I don't believe he's added that to the special session agenda, which he controls entirely. And maybe that will happen. But for right now, the Senate's doing that in hopes that he will come around to it. And maybe they know that he will. I don't know. It could definitely be used as a carrot of sorts, or maybe more of a stick, actually, as voucher proponents try to whip votes. If you don't support vouchers, you don't get teacher pay raises either. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where that goes.
Now, education choice has always been a big thing for our state leadership. And one of those choices are charter schools. And you actually just put out a new report that found that Commissioner of Education Mike Morath repeatedly waived expansion requirements for charter school networks, even when they didn't meet academic performance standards. Tell me a little bit more about the findings.
Yeah, sure. So the Texas Education Agency, which is the state agency that oversees public schools, they've had rules in place for years that are meant to ensure that only high-performing charter networks are allowed to grow. So opening new campuses, increasing enrollment, that kind of thing. But the education commissioner who heads TEA, Mike Morath, is allowed to waive those rules. And we found through a really extensive analysis of state records that he had done so like nearly 20 times during his tenure in cases where the charter network had too many failing campuses to qualify. So in addition to the, almost 20 waivers in cases where the charter network had too many failing campuses to qualify, we found that, and TEA told us this, that he's actually waived these rules about 100 times. But that was in cases where the charter network didn't meet that 90% threshold because they had one or more not rated campuses. It's common for charter networks to have not rated campuses. I didn't know this. It's interesting. It's because they often choose to serve kindergarten through second grade at new campuses before adding additional grade levels. And children in those grades do not take standardized tests. And campus scores are largely based on those standardized test scores. So that was something that we, opted not to include in the story because we were really trying to focus on the comparison with HISD and failing schools and all of that. But that was an interesting kind of side finding.
Instacart helps you get beer and wine delivered in as fast as an hour. So, whether you need to fill the cooler for tailgate season or fill your glass for Pinot by the fire season, you can save time by getting fall sips delivered in just a few clicks. Visit instacart.com or download the app to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply. Must be 21 or over for alcohol delivery where available. Instacart. Add life to cart.
Now, we'll get to HISD in a second, but I want to focus on the school vouchers and charter programs, right? And the charter schools, because could your findings indicate that, there could be potential failures with the proposed private school voucher programs because this will be another program the state has to manage?
Yeah, I think, so in the story, we chose to focus on reactions from impartial experts and even pro-charter groups who we wanted to weigh in on this. And that was a question that we asked them. Early on, I reached out to, when we found out that these waivers were happening, I called the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, which, represents charter schools, keeps track of each state's charter policies, advocates for charter growth, and asked them what, are these waivers happening in other states? And they were like, well, what are you talking about? We're confused. What do you mean they're waiving state requirements? And so that really, they said they had never heard of another state doing this. And that really kind of propelled our reporting. So the impartial experts that we spoke to, which were mainly education policy professors, they said that this is a red flag. It is a concern, and, it could potentially not bode well for a charter program. And pretty much across the board said it was, hypocritical given, how Commissioner Morath has treated HISD and is a really, stark contrast.
Yeah, and let's talk about HISD now. This adds another layer of concern for parents and teachers who are still upset about the state takeover of HISD when there's only one school that was failing, right? And Mike Morath has been allowing charter schools to expand in spite of failures, as you mentioned. What have his critics said, and what is the reaction to the report?
Yeah, I mean, I think every listener could probably guess what what critics have said. And that's why we really did choose to focus on quoting impartial experts and actually pro charter groups in this story, because I think it's obvious kind of what charter critics would say. They agree that it's hypocritical, it's unfair, and they were outraged by the story. I got a lot of emails and from traditional public school advocates saying, they were aware somewhat that this was happening, but this was kind of an issue that has bubbled up really recently and didn't have a lot of awareness, surrounding it. Mm-hmm. So I've heard from parents as well saying, this is crazy. What does this mean? And kind of wanting to know more information about it.
What's the benefit for Mike Morath to allow these schools to move forward in, despite the failing grades? What is it? What's the motivation?
That's a good question. I mean, I wish that he had talked to us and told us that, mm-hmm. But he declined numerous interview requests. I think in records, we were able to garner that charter schools say that, this 90% threshold is not fair. They often argued against the not rated issue that I mentioned earlier. They were like, it's not fair. We have all these not rated campuses. There's no way we could meet the 90% threshold. Again, that's another reason we decided to focus on only waivers where they had too many failing campuses, where it's like, we're not talking about your not rated campuses. Mm-hmm. You have too many failing campuses to qualify. So, I mean, we don't really know. You can speculate, but Mike Morath would not speak with us.
And that is the crazy part. Like, why isn't he speaking about it, right? Like, one of the stats from your investigation found that 11 schools that opened because of the waivers, 3 received an unacceptable rating within the first 2 years. So it's almost like they predicted that, hey, you're not ready for this expansion. And of course, it didn't work out.
Yeah. A big question as we reported this story was, okay, these waivers are happening. How are these schools doing? It was a bit of a challenge to do that because schools were not rated for 2 years during the pandemic. So we didn't have ratings, didn't have a lot of ratings this year. And then there were also some not rated kind of rules for campuses in Houston that were affected by Hurricane Harvey, and some other, kind of waivers or exemptions from the state during, extreme kind of circumstances. They often choose to say, we're going to give schools a pass. We're going to, waive them for because of outsized impact of things like the pandemic.
We keep hearing that. We keep hearing, whether it be with the private school vouchers or with charter schools, that state leadership is really focused on outcomes for children, right? Better outcomes for children in Texas. After all your reporting, after everything that we've talked about, do you think that's still the main focus?
Well, I mean, it's not my job to share my personal opinion, but, I can tell you what stakeholders think about this. Traditional public school advocates would say, absolutely not. They see this as part of a larger effort to privatize education, to turn it into a business, and to curry favor with voters who are really fed up with traditional public schools for whatever reason and want other options. And they think Republicans or pro voucher Republicans are trying to undermine the traditional public school system so that they can then argue that parents need alternatives, and it becomes this kind of cycle. So, even voucher proponents have acknowledged that they think that having more competition would lead to better outcomes. That's an argument they made with charter schools, but I think the data on that has been pretty mixed. And, traditional public school advocates say it's really preposterous to think that underfunded public schools will perform better when they are competing with charters and private schools for state funding. The state funds schools based on attendance, a per student lump sum. And so schools lose money when attendance drops.
All right, finally, before I let you go, look, this can be really confusing for parents. I'm a parent, and whether it be charter school networks, whether it be right now the discussion of private school vouchers or just public education in general, it is also confusing. You're on top of this. What advice do you have for parents, in Houston and around Texas to stay on top of this? What should they do?
I mean, staying informed is the most important thing. I would personally read the Texas Tribune as often, as you can. The Tribune will be covering this really closely, and if a voucher program is passed, they will absolutely have stories on how it works, what the outcomes will be, what parents can do, that kind of thing. But overall, I mean, the impact on parents and the state and all of that is, it's a $1 million question, I think, with a lot of different answers. In the short term, if vouchers pass, it will mean that parents do have another option, and that could be good in individual cases. But the question is, what are the long-term implications for student outcomes as a whole?
That's something we'll be keeping an eye on, and I know you will be as well. Kiah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was Kiah Collier. I've linked her work in our show notes. Hey, it's the start of the week, so this is the perfect time to head to our website, houston.citycast.fm, to subscribe to our newsletter, Hey Houston, or find old episodes of CityCast Houston. You'll find all the information right there, or you can just check out our show notes. That will do it for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new.